Welcome to the Economic Times CEO Roundtable. Our distinguished panelists will discuss the shape and drivers of a post-pandemic economic recovery and the ways in which business and the corporate world will change and adapt in the future. The Economic Times is partnered with Deloitte. Thank you for joining us. Please extend a warm welcome to our eminent panel.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Economic Times CEO Roundtable. We have a stellar lineup with us. They really need no introduction, but I'll do the honors in any case. We have Sundar Pichai, CEO of Alphabet, one of the most valuable companies in the world. Mr. Pichai was the chairman of the ET Awards jury this year. We have Kumar Mangalam Birla, chairman Aditya Birla Group. Sunil Mittal, chairman of Bharti Enterprises. Nandan Nilekani, non-executive chairman and founder of Infosys. Shantanu Narayan, CEO of Adobe. Sanjiv Bajaj, the chairman and managing director of Bajaj Finserv. We have Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, the chairperson of Biocon. We have Nisaba Godrej, managing director of Godrej Consumer Products. We have Vinod Khosla, Ventures. Sanjeev Goenka, chairman of RP Sanjeev Goenka Group. Nitin Kamath, the founder of Zerodha. And N. Venkatram, CEO of Deloitte India. So I'll direct my first question to Sundar Pichai. As you know, Sundar, the vaccination drive is in different stages in different parts of the world. India, we've just started. It's also in progress in the European Union and the US. Do you see economic activity picking up in different parts of the world as vaccination gathers momentum during the course of this year?
First of all, I think 2020 was a year like no other we have experienced. And so I think all of us here, we're grateful to the government and the frontline medical workers. I think we have to start their extraordinarily important work to manage the pandemic. Looking at the economic recovery, I think we do see signs. I think technology has played a role. We see particularly merchants shift online for the first time or use it to adapt. And it's been very entrepreneurial. And for example, in India, I think roughly 50% of small, medium enterprises have kind of adopted some form of digital for the first time in 2020. I was earlier listening to an example of a small sari shop and how they've migrated online and made that shift through the course of the year. And it's extraordinarily impressive to see. So I think people are being resourceful. You see shift there, but we definitely see the impact across the board. It's tough to understand what will fully be sustained through the course of the year. I think, vaccines are great, but there are new variants coming around. And so it's tough to predict the trajectory through 21. But I'm reasonably optimistic that we'll have a better year.
Yeah, I think predictions are all over the place. I mean, there is some prediction that we'll have another version of the Roaring '20s. I mean, there's going to be a very sharp and a very steep bounce back, and markets are going to, and things will get back to normal, and happy days will be here again once the vaccination is reasonably underway. But that's the optimistic scenario. There are also pessimistic scenarios, which is that many sectors have been deeply and perhaps permanently impacted. Where do you fit in there on this scale? Are you on the optimistic side, or do you think this is going to be a long-lasting pandemic, which things may not be hunky-dory?
I don't think there's going to be a simple, clear date where we come out of it in 2021. I think it'll linger through the year, and we'll have to work through it. And there are sectors like travel as a prime example, which has been deeply impacted. And there are sectors like that which will only recover once the pandemic is over. I think it's a bit difficult to predict, but I'm optimistic there'll be recovery. I've seen reports which are calling for reasonable GDP recoveries this year, but still too early to tell. Curious to hear what the other panelists think, but maybe someone else can add more.
What I would add to that is, at least across a lot of sectors that we operate in, Some have done much better than others. In fact, for many, many sectors, there's been a dramatic acceleration of growth. The one thing I will say, 10 years from now, the lasting influence will be the rate of innovation will see a dramatic change from this point onwards, because things that weren't accepted, for example, in healthcare, could you do televisits or could you do vaccine development in a year? There's a fundamental set of assumptions that have changed completely. Even behaviors, use of outdoor activities versus social activities, those balances have shifted. So I think we'll see the impact for 10 years to come, and many more people will accept more change as possible than has been accepted before.
Mr. Birla, would you like to weigh in on that? And you announced a lot of investments in the last couple of months, including in new areas like paint. So you seem to be on the optimistic scale.
Clearly, Bodhi, we've announced investments of the tune of about $2 billion in the last 3 months. My very clear view is that almost across the swath of industries that we are present in, businesses are back. I think the economy has made or is well on its way to make a V-shaped recovery. You've had support from the RBI, like I said, good support, monetary policy, fiscal policy. Rural India has been a great source of growth. It's been some sort of a growth engine in some ways. So very impressive. I think that we have great confidence in the Indian economy. All the fundamentals that get spoken about all the time all remain, true even today. And we're really surprised at the way the speed at which markets have come back, the speed at which equity markets have come back. So very positive on India.
Shantanu, you have a wide-angle view of the economy. How do you see things?
I think they really are the haves and the have-nots. And I think the structural change that the other panelists alluded to are going to happen. And while we are biased, I believe digital changes everything. How you're entertained, how you learn, education is going to change, healthcare. And so for us, we're actually seeing tremendous secular demand as it relates to all things technology. The genie is not going to go back into the bottle in terms of even after the vaccine emerges. So the future of work is going to be more hybrid and remote. The future of healthcare is going to have a deeper technology component to it. And I think for India, and frankly, for all the companies across the world, it's going to be how they adopt to this new reality. And so my sense is that all the structural changes that the governments around the world have done, whether it relates to monetary policy, have really propped up the economy, but fundamental change is still upon us. And I believe disruption across technology, as well as how you do business, is how companies will thrive and economies will survive.
If I can bring in Nandan here, and in fact, Shantanu also alluded to this. It's become a bit of a cliche to say that digitalization has accelerated during the whole last 10 or 11 months. But what are the specific ways in which you see digitalization accelerating?
No, I think it's across the board. And I think both Shantanu and Sundar alluded to it. I think retailers are doing more online selling, doctors are doing more telemedicine, food guys have more delivery. It's all over the place. So I think digital acceleration is here to stay. But specifically on India, I had 2 points. One is the need of the hour is to dramatically increase the rate of vaccination. We have to go to 5 to 10 million vaccinations a day if we are going to come to any kind of reasonable recovery from this situation. And that will require a concerted, united effort by both the public sector and the private sector. So I think to me, the big thing is we have the technology, we have the vaccine supply, we have the distribution channels, but we need to make sure that both public and private players can come together and increase the vaccination to 5 to 10 million vaccinations a day, which I think will make a big difference whether recovery takes 6 months or 4 years. So that's one point I think we all need to emphasize. The second is that thanks to this digital acceleration and what Sundar mentioned, that more and more businesses are doing digital transactions, they're doing digital payments, they're buying digitally, they're filing their tax returns digitally. Small companies now have a wealth of data which can be leveraged for them to get credit. And we have to create a new model of credit based on flow of transactions, not on assets, and make sure that small businesses access that. And that will be the key, because if you want jobs, businesses have to do well. If businesses have to do well, they will get access to credit. And the 10 million businesses in GST should start getting access to credit. And we have a completely new architecture in India called the account aggregator, supported by the RBI, which allows companies to leverage their own data to get credit. And this builds on the earlier things of like identity and payments and so on. So I think if we can leverage the digital footprint of all these small businesses to get them flow-based credit, that will make a big jump in accelerating the recovery of the economy.
One of the points that you raised on vaccination, is there anti-vaxxer movements have so far not been prominent in India, but do you sense that coming up and becoming a more, becoming more of an element in India? There are media reports which just a lot of people are reluctant to get themselves vaccinated.
No, I don't think. The data is showing that 60-70% of Indians are comfortable taking a vaccine. So just the fact, look, if you give an appointment to somebody and he does not turn up because he can't come, that doesn't mean he's an anti-vaxxer. It's just that he couldn't come. So I wouldn't read too much into that data.
Right. Anyone else wants to weigh in on that? Kiran, do you want to come in?
Well, I just want to say that, the pandemic has unleashed, a very strong, quotient of innovation in the healthcare sector. And that is showing that India can be very agile and resilient when at least this sector, which has never really had the kind of investment or the focus. And now we are seeing a huge interest in investing in healthcare, which is only good for the country, because I've always worried about the fact that the Indian healthcare sector or the pharmaceutical sector has always been a volume play. And, whilst we've accounted for 50-60% of the vaccine capacity of the world and the generics capacity of the world, the fact is that we only account for 3% of the global market share in pharmaceuticals and vaccines. So we've got to move from volume to value. And I think this has now unleashed the opportunity for India to play that way. So I think the kind of innovation that came out, whether it was in the form of new diagnostic tests, the way we've gone about developing vaccines, and the way we've gone about developing software to deploy vaccines, I think is very, very, reassuring that India can actually move in that right direction. And the fact that the government also has invested a huge amount, finally, in research and innovation is also good news. So I, for one, feel very, reassured and optimistic that the Indian pharmaceutical and healthcare sector will finally, create value and get the kind of investment valuation that it deserves. Because, all this time, the multiples that we attracted were amongst the lowest in the world, and today it's becoming a lot richer. We need currency to invest, and therefore I believe that this is a step in the right direction, and I'm very optimistic that India can deploy vaccination at a very, very high speed and scale, just like Nandan said, provided we get private sector to play its role. And I think for a country like India, we have a narrow window, because right now the virus is on the wane. I don't think we should even be allowing a next wave to come into play. I think what we really need to do is to use this narrow window to really vaccinate as many people as possible.
So if I may, Modi, just to conclude on this particular point on the impact of pandemic, especially on India, I would say India has managed it very well, a very, very tight restriction in the first few weeks, bordering on sometimes being too strict, but I think that was the right way to do it. And then switching and calibrating to a more nuanced and balanced approach in opening up and shifting from lives to livelihoods very quickly, because India doesn't have the kind of money the Western world has, and our population is rather very large. And that switch from lives to livelihoods, really was helpful. And what you're seeing in the last few months, the results coming out of the corporation suggest that the factories were churning out cement and steel, and construction kept on going. A lot of parts of the economy were quickly brought back. Having said that, I still feel we are not going to have a complete V. And I hope it's going to be a narrow W, but it will be a W. This is a relief rally. A lot of money has been printed across the globe. A lot of money is being pumped into the stock markets. A lot of money is available to corporates. And you will definitely see a dip, and especially led by some of the sectors that Sundar also mentioned: travel, hospitality, cruise liners, tourism. And that's taken a massive hit. So there will be a bit of a drop. I'm only hoping that the W is going to be a very slim W, and inevitably we sort of come out of it back very quickly.
Nandan, I mean, you started the, of course, you are the founder of Aadhaar, which of course completely was implemented at scale and at speed. Are there any lessons that we can learn as far as the vaccine rollout in India is concerned, which will be the largest in the world, from Aadhaar? I mean, how can we harness technology to do that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is actually a bigger challenge than Aadhaar. Aadhaar was a physical enrollment system that enrolled 1.5 million people a day. Took 4 years to reach 600 million and 6 years to reach 1 billion. In this case, if you want to vaccinate 1 billion people with 2 doses, that's 2 billion doses of vaccinations within 1 year. So actually the scale of this challenge is even bigger than Aadhaar. And it requires a highly scalable architecture, which has multiple hospitals, private sector, government hospitals, all plugged into a common digital infrastructure. And we have to have a digital vaccination certificate, which is the common source of truth for everybody, so that you have a single place where you have all the vaccination details. I think this architecture is not a big deal. It's just that it requires us to commit to it, and we can build the world's highest speed vaccination system at 5 to 10 million people a day very quickly. And I think it's we have all the learnings of how to do population scale projects of this type. It's also important because what Kiran said, you see, right now we have a lull, but suppose a variant comes in from South Africa or Brazil or wherever, and that variant is more dangerous and more contagious, then we'll have another huge wave. Before the variants come in, we should reach some kind of herd immunity through vaccination. I mean, it's a no-brainer that we need to dramatically accelerate our vaccination, and all the tools for doing it are there.
One thing, if I could add here, because Aadhaar was mentioned, and the scale of digital transformation, to put it in some perspective, Nandan would know this well, the first billion transactions per month, I think it took 3 years to achieve. Then you went to a rate of 1 billion transactions in a year. I think by end of 2022, you will have 1 billion transactions a day, right? And so this shift in digital payments is playing out over a period of 3 years. Fascinated to see how many kiranas have adopted, digital payments now, and they're making the transition through a year like COVID. And when I look at the trends in India around video conferencing, startups emerging, there are 38 unicorns now, but 12 of them were added last year alone. And so, these are real shifts happening. And when we step back and look back at this phase, 10 years from now, you would rightfully recognize it as a point of inflection digitally.
So Nandan, right now the Indian vaccination process seems very public sector led. How do you see the private sector playing a role here? And what are the specific areas in which the private sector can play roles?
See, the private sector has multiple roles. First is, of course, that employers can start vaccinating their employees. And if you take the entire organized sector, that could give you 20 million people getting vaccinated directly by companies. So a company would buy from Serum or whoever it is and do their employees. It requires a chain of authorized vaccination hospitals like the Apollos of the world, who will take on the responsibility. They will have the required nurses and doctors and PPE and syringes and so on, and a digital infrastructure where everybody is authenticated and everybody gets a digital certificate in real time. And that digital certificate is a unifier of the private sector approach and the public sector approach. And I think it's all there. The design is there. It's not a big deal to design this. It's really agreeing that this is too big a challenge to be done only in the government, and that you need to bring in private sector. This can be rolled out within a month if there is if that decision is made.
Right.
And may I just add that we've actually have an analogy when it came to PCR testing in the early phase of the disease. If you remember, it was very confined to the public sector when we started off testing the pandemic, and it was only when the private sector was roped in that we started seeing a huge ramping up of testing capacity. And today we can actually do millions a day, unlike the few thousands per day we were doing at the early stage of the pandemic. So we already know the power of combining the private sector with the public sector capacity. So I think this is a no-brainer. It has to be done sooner than later. I really believe we have a very narrow window and we must not lose time, because we don't want vaccines piling up in warehouses and not really deploying them in people.
I just wanted to echo maybe for 30 seconds what Kiran said, which is it's not just about the vaccinations. I mean, you need all three prongs. You need the testing, and the testing has to scale, and you need therapeutics, because unfortunately people are going to get afflicted by this. And so while I completely concur that the focus should be on vaccinations, if we remove the attention on both testing and therapeutics, I think that's going to be very limiting as it relates to addressing this once and for all.
Let me just get in Sanjiv Bajaj here. Sanjiv, just to, on the theme of accelerated digitalization, you pioneered digital when it came to consumer lending. So how is, now competition is rising. How has that changed over the past year, and what would it take to be a winner? I mean, what would distinguish a winner from a loser?
Bodhi, as other participants have also said, digital is really become now a way of life by permeating every part of business. Whether you think of customer access and service, you think of now how employees will work. When you think of data insights through ML and AI that is driving decisions and enabling a much higher speed, whether it's of analysis or action. This is something that will differentiate the majority of companies from others. We've also seen how the pandemic has brought millions of new customers to accept digital as a way of life. Social media is also driving both perception and service. And this was very different till 3 years ago, at least in a country like India. We are seeing the use of cloud-enabled business services, which are bringing nimbleness and scalability. And on the other side of it, we are also seeing cybersecurity threats increasing substantially. So businesses have to be able to manage all these different issues that are coming up as a result of the digital world. And people that will come out as winners over here are those that will drive change continuously, that will keep innovating for differentiation, and those that will have a higher level of empowerment in their teams to help in speed of both decision making and action.
Sanjiv, one question: how do you see the there's obviously the loan moratorium, which is still on in some ways. There have been job losses in India. There have been salary cuts, as we all know. How do you see the general economic situation? Is the worst behind us, or do you think the pain will still be prolonged? We seem to have moved from extreme pessimism in April, May to perhaps extreme optimism right now. But how do you see this scenario?
I think that's a fair question, Bodhi. See, the first thing that happened was the significant amount of liquidity that got infused in the system. It helped keep both people and businesses afloat. And this has led to good recovery in most sectors. We know, of course, a few sectors got hurt a lot more than others and are still hurting. Towards the other questions also, whether Kiran or Nandan and others have said, controlling this pandemic is going to be really important, because confidence is what gets converted into demand at the retail customer level. So we have to be able to continue doing that. It's also important, if you see the difference between the private sector lenders and the public sector lenders over the last year, most private sector lenders have gone and raised more capital. They've provided for what they think are potential additional losses. And that's why most of them are back to 90% of pre-COVID business. Whereas on the public sector side, the amount of capital that's been available to them has been far short of what is required. And we've not seen the same level of provisioning. And that's why incremental credit from the public sector is better, but it is still muted. And 70% of Indian banking is with the public sector banks. That still moves the needle overall. So we have to see more capital coming into public sector banks to be able to really drive the real economy. We have seen these significant announcements in the budget, but where will the money come for all that? So I think execution all across is going to be very key now.
So I'd like to direct my next question to Mr. N. Venkatram. Venkat, do you have exposure to clients, obviously, across a wide range of sectors? Are they more optimistic now than they were 5 or 6 months ago?
Yes, certainly. I think there is cautious optimism, and because of the W, I think we're still concentrating on preserving cash. It's it's not. I think balancing the short term and balancing the long term is becoming more and more important, because the pressures of existing business are there. The pressures to do your tech transformation, to move on to cloud. I think everybody recognizes that these are all the forces that are at play and are long-term events that you will have to play with. It actually depends sector by sector, but if I may just touch on one, which is say the banking sector today, I think that's the one that I would watch very closely, because it's very linked, deeply linked to the recovery of the economy as well. And the very fact that we still have moratorium, the fact that the insolvency code is put in abeyance, there will be certainly a lot of pain that still has to be taken before we can really say that there is normalcy. It would at least be a year away, even though the recovery may per se start a little earlier. So yes, I think that businesses are more optimistic, but there is still work to be done.
Right, but just to take up on what you said on the banking sector, so do you see much more pain ahead once the moratorium is lifted and people start recognizing NPAs?
Yes, I think the pain will be there, because the write-offs will happen, and then when you look at the public sector, you will have to investigate why the write-offs did happen. And while a lot of steps have been taken, decriminalization of laws and all that, the reality is that if you still do go after people, it does spread a pall of gloom. And I think that is the piece of it that we've got to fix. That yes, it was a bad period. There could be genuine business failures, and there could also be failures because of bad behavior. But distinguishing between this as we move forward and put this behind us is going to be important.
If I can get Nisa into this, Nisa, if I can ask you, what are, obviously the rural economy during this whole process has been propped up to some extent because of various, government support, various forms of government support. But the urban economy, the migration of the urban poor to the rural areas, then to some extent back again, it seems to be showing a lot of stress. I mean, what do you think needs to be done to revive, consumption in urban areas?
So Bodhi, I think, like Sunil said, I think we are sort of facing a W, and I would say, it's hopeful realism. There's a lot of hope because of the vaccines out there. The budget, I think, has been quite strong and should, be good for job creation, which should help sort of urban areas. I think what we're seeing now as we go into sort of Q4, reverse migration is happening. I think the metros are still sort of very stressed, but the tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, we have quite a positive outlook on, because if we can get the pandemic under control and we can get the economy going, I think there's some disclaimers to that we don't have another demonetization or any big shock to the economy. I think some of these secular trends like urbanization, digitalization sort of will help the urban economy grow also. And I think, we're going to have more people than China by say 2025. So if we can get our economy going, the demand will be there. So I would be quite positive also on urban India.
Just wanted to ask you, how important is digital in your life for your company?
I think it's incredibly important, Bodhi. Sundar talked about a sari shop. I was out in Bombay in the market with Kirana stores, digital payments. They're buying from JioMart, Oran, our distributors. So actually, people say what is e-commerce, what is modern trade, what is general trade. It's a full blending now of, because everyone is digitizing. So I think it's both from a demand creation is all moving digital, and so are the channels. So I think it's a time for businesses to be extremely agile right now.
If I could come to Nitin, I was actually tempted to ask you about Robinhood, what you think, but the point is, in some ways, you epitomize digitalization, right? I mean, you sort of you didn't come from the traditional brick and mortars kind of background in a brokerage with decades. So how has the ride been, and how has it been particularly in the last 10 months?
Yeah, thanks. No, I think the last year has been spectacular. The first few months from Feb to April, I think we had the first rush of customers come in, and they kind of got the timing right. So whoever invested made some money, and then I think the virality kicked in, as in people went out there and said, you know what, I invested and I made some money. And people working from home, interest rates are low, so it was all, and people are not spending money, so there's also money in hand. So I think it was like a mega rush from April, May onwards. So month on month it's gotten better. Actually, last month was our biggest month till date. Of course, it's also helping that we are hitting all-time highs. And also about Robinhood, right? I just recently shared this thing that India actually, SEBI has done a much better job than the regulator there, right? As in every time there's been an incident, SEBI has fixed a bunch of rules. So a bunch of things that's gone wrong in the US in the recent last 2-3 weeks, that can't really happen in India because of all the regulations in place. But this year, like I said, it's been quite spectacular. And I think it all started with the SBI Cards IPO. 2019 end, and then there's generally a rush of, because usually what we've seen is every time there is a popular IPO, a lot of first-time customers come into investing in the markets. The other challenge though in India is that none of the newer age tech companies are looking to IPO in any case. So it's a challenge for brokerage businesses like us to be able to add a lot of first-time customers if companies like, say, Paytm, Zomato, etc., don't IPO in India.
I saw a long thread that you did on the Robinhood thing. So tell me, do you also have a similar phenomenon in India that we have seen in the US? A lot of first-time investors, people with maybe spare time, or in the US, it's said that a lot of people who have got the payment protection checks have been spending some of the money in markets. We don't have a version of payment protection checks in India. But there has been anecdotally, there have been a lot of first-time investors coming into the Indian markets, right, over the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely. As in 70% of all the customers we've added are first-time customers, right. And they're less than 30 years of age. The good thing is they are not really coming and speculating as such, as in they're not doing options trading, they're not doing a lot of intraday trading. They're coming and buying pedigree stocks, which is okay, I guess, because the best form of financial education is owning a stock of a company, and they're not really doing with large amounts of money as well. And again, India compared to the US, SEBI has all these levers in place to ensure investors don't get leveraged by default. Just to give an example, if you open an account in the US, by default, I think Robinhood and others, get you to open a margin account. A margin account means that you can buy for more or short sell and etc. In India, it's a cash account that gets opened by default. So so there is no margin to, you can't buy 10, with say 10,000 rupees, 50,000 rupees of Infosys for overnight. And most of the issues that we've seen over the last few days has been that, as in brokers let customers leverage, they let customers who don't know how to short, and then I think whatever happened after that.
Thanks, Nitin.
Modi, if I may just interject on what Nitin said, he raised a very important point on the startups listing in India. I think this is a very critical issue for the nation to solve. Particularly, we also heard Sundar talk about the fact that, the number of startups that have come, the number of, the fact that if you really look at it, we will certainly we are already the third largest startup nation in the world, and it's only going to grow. And if we have this leakage that when they really want to list, they go overseas to list, I think we will be losing a lot of value. So SEBI has also played a major role in trying to simplify things, but attracting the companies to come to actually list in India rather than to go to Singapore, for example, is something that's going to be important. I do see that they will go back to the NASDAQ and elsewhere, and we must see, even if there's a dual listing possibility, that they do list here as well.
So if I can come to Mr. Goenka, Sanjiv, you represent a wide range of sectors. You obviously run the Calcutta's premier electricity distribution company. You're present in the retail sector. How do you see the recovery picking up compared to the situation 5 or 6 months ago?
Well, Bodhi, quite honestly, for us, I think the last 3 months have been probably the best months that we've ever had. And every company, whether it's in chemicals or whether it's retail, whether it's music, whether it's power, every company is going through the highest ever sales and the highest ever profits. So probably, I think we are beginning to see the signs of a very significant recovery. And of course, I think there have been different views whether it's going to be a V-shaped or a W-shaped recovery. But clearly we are recovering, and we are clearly an economy that's poised to grow, and consumption is happening. And I think that's a very, very positive thing from my perspective.
If I can come to Mr. Mittal, has the year generally turned out to be far better than you may have expected about 5 to 6 months, and what do you project going forward?
We were one of the sectors, just like several other digital segments of the industry, which was bound to do well in a situation where almost everything moved online. And the only concern could have been, will we rise to the occasion? Will we have people out on the streets ensuring the cell sites are up, the diesel generators are being filled up? And I must say all the operators, all the 3 plus another half operator, all performed well. The traffic shifted almost overnight from various business districts to homes. And, in a terrestrial mobile network, traffic planning is not easy to shift overnight, but I would say the teams managed it very well. The Indian government also moved in, spoke to all the providers of OTT services, Netflix, Amazon Prime, to dumb down from HD to SD, so releasing capacities and all that. I would say the industry has done extremely well. Today, India can very proudly say that it didn't have a minute's disruption in as far as the digital networks are concerned. Obviously, the business was strong during this time. And do keep in mind that there were tens and tens of millions of migrants who moved from cities into rural areas. And they were also kept on being connected with the digital world, with the financial world, and they could carry on with their businesses. Today, when we say Indian economy is in good shape, I have to say a very large credit should go to India being a truly connected society today, which allowed the livelihoods to be sustained and every digital provider to access customers and vice versa. So company has done well, but amongst the players last few quarters, Airtel has demonstrated its strong connect with the customers. The brand is a brand of choice that we have connected 14 million customers for the last 2 quarters each, is a testimony to the institution that Airtel is today.
And there's also been a lot of debate about whether the government has done enough by way, it should have given more direct fiscal support as one school of thought. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I would say, unfortunately, the telecom world has had the, contradictory position. India celebrates it being digitally connected. It celebrates the telecom industry. But unfortunately, it's also taxed like a tobacco industry because it generates a lot of revenue. And the customers don't get to see the pain because if there is a 14% license fee and spectrum charge and 18% GST, it kind of comes from the kitty of the overall revenue of the operators. So it is heavily taxed. But this year, I had personally written to the finance minister, you can ignore the corporate sector completely. We will fend for ourselves. If there are lesser profits, we'll deal with it. This is the year when India needs every penny into the bottom of the pyramid in taking care of those people who deserve it the most. So no regrets at all.
I just also wanted your thoughts on where you stand on this issue as to whether, the government could have done more by way of direct fiscal support. What are your thoughts?
I mean, no sort of, there's no black and white on this. I mean, there is no right or wrong answer. I think they've done, like I was saying earlier, a lot of good things. I think the regulators, the relevant regulators, the government have all moved together. So, for example, a lot of things that they've done that has boosted the rural economy, for example. It's not direct fiscal benefit, but it has definitely helped, like I was saying earlier, to make the rural economy a growth engine. So I think that I think they've done enough. One can always ask for more, but I think that, they've come out of this looking pretty good.
You're present across a very wide range of sectors, cements, commodities, and so on. What kind of are you seeing a demand revival in these areas?
Definitely. For example, in the case of cement, large infrastructure spend happening again. East India, for example, governments are spending a lot on infrastructure. Surprise, surprise. Even in rural India, I keep coming back to rural India, but everyone's adding one room to the house or building one small house after this experience of the pandemic and having to stay at home. A lot of migrant workers are doing that, adding a room, adding a small house, which has been a huge impetus for cement demand, for example. So yes, even in terms of aluminium, consuming sectors are looking up. Demand is coming back. So, whereas there is much more liquidity in the system than normal, and we'll have to see how the economy reacts to that liquidity coming down to normal levels. What I see is authentic demand across sectors, which I think is very heartening.
The RBI has recently come out with these new norms for allowing industrial houses. I mean, they're in the discussion stage, but they may allow industrial house conglomerates such as yourself to set up banks. What are your views on that, and would you be interested?
I think that's a very positive move, Bodhi. We'd applied for a license 25 years ago. I think that if the economy has to grow every year at 7%, 8%, 9%, you need that kind of generation of credit. And I just don't think we have enough large banks in the system to be able to do that. I think, you can have ironclad regulation that, it completely safeguards the bank from the rest of the group. Create firewalls around a bank. That's not reason enough. Just because one is a large industrial house, it's not reason enough to not give us a banking license. For example, in our case, we have enough banking relationships. If we were given a banking license, quite happy to not have any business relationship between the bank and the rest of the group. But at a broader level, at a larger economic level, I think just creation of credit in much larger measure is going to require the presence of many more banks.
So let me, I believe Sundar has to go. If I can ask him a sort of final question. Jeff Bezos announced that he was stepping down from CEO and he would be executive chairman, obviously. And this is a transition that you've experienced firsthand at Alphabet, Google. Do you believe at some stage companies are better served when founders seek their place at the steering wheel?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it takes a lot of commitment. There are many CEOs across this panel as well, and I think it takes extraordinary commitment and work, and I think they are making natural transitions. I think you're talking about some of the best entrepreneurs across the board, and anytime they step down, I think there's an impact for sure. But I think they've taken great care to make sure the transition is well thought out and helps take the company to the next stage.
But I mean, since you, when is a natural time, if there is such a thing, for a founder to, Bezos is not exactly stepping down; he's still very much in the business. But what is a natural time for them to sort of redefine their roles?
I mean, it's a very personal decision, isn't it? I think in each of these cases, I think most of them tend to do it when the company is on a strong foundation. You've laid the foundation for diversifying your business and ensuring it can carry on for a while. You feel the culture is set and you're confident about the innovation ahead. But beyond that, I think it's a personal journey, and it also reflects the importance of cloud, I guess, in the context of the Amazon transition overall, which is related to the shift we have been talking about, the shift to digital, and how important a role cloud has been in that shift.
Right. On a slightly lighter way, I suppose, Google knows what people are searching for around the world. During the pandemic, what are they looking for? What have they been looking for in the last 10 months?
I mean, to step back, on an average day, 15% of queries is something we have never seen before. So there is just a lot of, new things which constantly happen. But through pandemic, I mean, you see people shift behavior very quickly. People trying to learn new things in YouTube, or, I mentioned people trying to learn new skills. You can see all that in the query stream. People trying to connect with other people, people looking for comfort. Those are all kind of cross trends we see pretty much across the world. And, it shows that people are looking for deeper things to learn, to connect, and to comfort during times like this. And during this whole period, obviously this has been an extraordinary time with big political developments. Big tech itself has been, under a lot of political and societal pressure. How has it been like dealing with this? One has obviously followed what's going on with Google, whether, obviously in some sense, these big tech companies are the center of American politics, and one can say even global politics. How is it sort of dealing with the pressure? It's naturally, we've all talked about the increasing role technology is playing in people's lives. So to me, it comes with that. And, I think there are important questions to be debated and answered. What is free speech? Where do you draw the lines? And, and how should platforms decide who gets to say what? I mean, these are, questions which technology companies play an important role in, but they are important societal questions too. And so it's not surprising to me that there is a lot of conversations. I think in some of these areas, there would need to be regulations, I think, which would give clearer frameworks. You've seen that with something like privacy. Europe's GDPR, lays out a privacy framework, and I think many countries are thinking through what the appropriate privacy protections are for their citizens. Similarly, around content and competition, I think there'll be important questions to be sorted out, but I see it as a natural stage of where the tech sector is. Does anyone else want to comment on this? Maybe Vinod or even Shantanu?
Well, a couple of thoughts. I mean, first is I think the innovation that we've all demonstrated over this time has been unprecedented. And, from my perspective, on both the privacy as well as on the regulation front, I mean, in many ways, I think companies like Google or companies like Adobe really feel their obligation towards saying, we serve our customers. And anytime you do anything to have that trust with your customers compromised, that's the most important thing that we worry about. And so I think you're constantly, debating how you move the technology forward, but while keeping customer sentiment and customer interests best at heart. And I actually feel like the technology is moving so far that a lot of it will also depend on our brand promise with our customers. And by definition, I think the regulation will always be a little bit behind. And so I think we just have to be very conscious of the fact that we have this great responsibility by virtue of the fact that, our technology is used on every computer perhaps on the planet. And but at the end of the day, our job is innovating, and our job is disrupting ourselves. Otherwise, somebody else will. So I think that's what drives us at Adobe.
Vinod, do you want to comment on this?
Not a lot to add. I think the rate of change is clearly accelerating, and hence regulation falls further and further behind the state. Well, we'll just have to whack-a-mole fix it as we go along. We've seen in the financial system every crisis, starting with the 1933 Securities Act in the US, was fixing a bunch of regulation. Then there was SET in 87. Then around the internet bust around 98, 99, 2008. So I think regulation always tries to catch up. I do think the tech companies are more progressive than people give them credit for in their values and in meeting customers' needs, because they have strong pressures, surprising pressures, even from inside, from their own employees. And so I do think this will be a continual process. It'll appear to get worse because the rate of change will get worse. But otherwise, I think, the thing we fundamentally have to realize is almost every area. Media, it was none of the media companies that innovated. It was YouTube and things like Netflix and Facebook and Twitter that were the new media companies. In fintech, at least today, I find it surprising, a less than 10-year-old company like Square is worth the same as American Express. Stripe and Affirm and others worth more than most companies. I suspect the nature of fintech will change. I see the same change coming in driven by climate and sustainability in things like oil and gas and cement and steel. I see a dramatic, and one of the things COVID has caused is a real rethink of supply chain vulnerabilities. So I see a dramatic increase in local manufacturing, aided by AI robotics as an area, new technologies like 3D printing and composites. So I actually think we haven't started to see the bulk of the effect on GDP driven by technology, and we'll see more and more of it. And frankly, this will cause disruption. It's always the disrupted that create a lot of noise and pressure for regulation. I mean, Sundar won't say this, but I'll tell you, the Europeans hate the fact that there's no European tech companies leading, and hence they drive regulation. And so there are a complex set of factors, both disruption, the disrupted wanting to really push back and slow things down, as well as things like jealousy and other factors.
So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an enriching discussion covering a wide gamut of subjects, from digitization, the economic rebound from the pandemic, how to do vaccination right, and so on and so forth. I'm sure our audience would have greatly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.